We began talking about perspective the last time that we were together. And in the 1950s, an incident took place on a sweltering summer afternoon alongside a railroad track where a crew of workers was doing some repair. Then there was a train that came chugging down the track, and it pulled off to a side rail. And all of a sudden what happened was that this man lowered the window and said outside the window, he said, Dave Anderson. He said, is that you? And Dave responded with, yeah, Jim, it's me. And so he said, come on up here, Dave. Let's talk for a little while. And Dave was so happy to be able to get out of the sweltering heat that hot afternoon, and he stayed inside this car, air conditioned and wonderfully climately controlled, for over an hour. And finally, when he had come back out to be with his crew began to say to him, isn't that Jim Murphy's car? He said, yeah, but they said, but Jim's the president of the company. Do you know Jim? He said, oh yeah, I know Jim. And then all of a sudden the rest of the crew came around because they didn't understand how this man that was working on the track was good friends, even on a first name basis, with the president of the company. And they said, how did you know Jim? How do you know him? I mean, really? He said, oh, Jim and I have been buddies. We've been pals for about 20 years. He said, but how do you know him? He said, well, Jim Murphy and I came to work for the railroad at the same time. We worked on the same crew. And they said to him, he said, but Dave, how is it that you're working on the track and Jim Murphy is riding in his own private car? And he said, well, as he looked up into the sky wistfully, he said these words. He said, we worked together. We began together. He said there was only one simple difference between us. He said, when Jim Murphy came to work for the railroad, he came to work for the railroad. When I came to work for the railroad, I came to work for $1.75 an hour. He said that's the only difference between us. He worked for the railroad, and I work for the money. The difference in perspectives. Yesterday, Sarah had a birthday party, and it was quite an interesting. How many of you were able to stop by Sarah's little birthday party yesterday? Yeah, a number of you really did, and we were having a good time. We're sitting around the table, Constantina and I, and a couple of others, and Nathan was speaking about, and Nathan's parents, if you remember, Nathan Giffin's parents, what they are the missionaries that we support in Reynosa, Mexico. So we were talking, we're sitting there at the table, and as Nathan, we're talking about kind of old stories, and Nathan was telling a story about the time that while he was growing up, that he had actually gone home and found on the counter that there was a meatloaf. And there were 4 slices of that meatloaf, and he was just so excited about it that he ate the whole thing. It was absolutely delightful that he ate the whole thing. But when he moved the plate, he saw the note that said, you can have 1 slice of this, and then there's a slice for your other 3 sisters. So he said, I didn't know what to do, because I couldn't have anyone believe that I ate the entire meatloaf. So what I did was, I got a can of You remember what I said? He said, I got a can of Alpo and I shaped it into the shape of a meatloaf. I covered it all with ketchup and I baked it and cut it into 3 slices. And he said, my sisters ate it. And he said, they didn't say anything about it. It was like amazing till my mom found out. But isn't it funny about perspectives? Now, isn't that funny? Perspectives. Everyone say perspectives. You know, one person sees a meatloaf, another one sees a can of Alpo. But if someone believes that something's a meatloaf when it's Alpo, they still eat it because it's just perspectives. So remember, perspective actually changes a lot of things. You know, perspective is interesting in many different ways because a person with a perspective, friends, this individual with the right perspective of life, it becomes very powerful to them. Johnny Erickson Tada said these words about perspective. She said this. She said, perspective is everything when you're experiencing the challenges of life. You see, Dr. Wayne Dyer, an inspirational author, said this about perspective. He said, you can change absolutely anything about your life when you first change the way that you see it. More all the time with the discoveries of brain sciences, more all that time, what happens is that we're discovering that your mind actually can really guide your life. Your life becomes predetermined by what's in your mind. It becomes predetermined. Now, remember, we've talked about this before. Remember, we talked about the determinisms. Everyone say determinism. Now, there's determinisms in life. You have a genetic determinism. The reason why that you look the way that you do is because it's been genetically determined already. And all that happens is that time reveals what that genetic determinism already was. You have an emotional determinism. That emotional determinism is that if you talk about fear, then your children do. It has been very difficult for me to see people that I know very well to actually have their little children who are only 2 years old come out with the words, "That scares me." Who told you that? "I'm afraid." Who told you that? Because there's emotional determinisms. And then there's lastly what's called environmental determinisms. Those environmental determinisms are the things you will not be able to escape the environment that you are caught prisoner in. If what it is that I come to Christ, and yet what I do is I still hang around with some of my friends that are druggies or guys that like to party all the time, it will only be a short amount of time before that I will be the druggie and I'll be the guy that really kind of goes out and parties all the time. Because there's environmental determinisms. And actually the definition of that is that from which there is no escape. It's an environmental determinism. If what you do is that you hang around negative people, you'll be negative. It's in your environment. But if you choose that what you're going to do is you're going to consistently hang around with positive people, then your life will become positive. It begins to rub off on you. It begins to be something that you look for. They begin to be the words that you long to hear. Those positive words, those positive affirmations, those things that you really want in life, they become the things that you want because you've now begun to hang around with it. So remember, everyone has determinisms. And Wayne Dyer said that you can change absolutely everything in your life if in fact what you do is that you change the way you see it. You see, perspective determines reactions. Perspective determines moods. Perspectives, remember, determines your priorities, and perspective determines your pursuits. But what does the word perspective mean? And then we're going to get down into the Word of God and take a look and see where there have been perspectives. Perspective actually just means it's your viewpoint. Say, my viewpoint is according to God's Word. Say it again. Say it like you mean it. So remember that your perspective is your viewpoint. It's your attitude. Your attitude, friends, really determines so much about your life. It determines so much about not only the way that you view things, not only the way that you see things, not only the way that you approach things. I'm reminded of a little story about attitude, where this woman came up to this man and talked to him. He was actually a motivational speaker, and she says to him, she said, I'm looking for you. And I have that happen quite often. And she says to him, she said, I just don't know what to do. Those people that I work with, I hate them. I hate everything about my job. I hate it. And he says to her, he said, well, now, what you need to do is start writing a list about the things that you like about it. He said, so take out your notebook. And she didn't. And these were the words that he said to her. He said, now, if you won't write down a list about what you like about it, it's been wonderful speaking to you, because nothing can change your view unless you're willing to document it. So he said, now, if you take out your notebook, let's talk about it together. Number one, you have a job. Number two, do you go to your job for nothing? Well, no, I get a paycheck. Well, okay, that's a good thing. So something that you like about your job is that you actually can count on being paid. Number three, what kind of perks does your job have? How close do you live to your job? Have you met any people that are nice people? Well, I just hate my job. So what he told her was this. He said, write down this list. And he said, by the time that we were done with our conversation, she had 22 things about her job that she liked. And so he said, tonight, after all your chores are done and after everything's finished, he said, I want you to go in front of the mirror. And I want you to say these words. Everything that you've just written down, have I tricked you into writing them or saying them? No. Then go in front of the mirror, and tonight, I want you to speak into the mirror that I like my job because I have one. I like my job because I get paid. I like my job because it affords good things for my family. Without it, things would be in much worse shape. So she did that every day. 6 weeks later, she saw the gentleman again, and when she saw him, she came to him, but this time when she was coming, she wasn't trying to be like an ogre that beat the ground with her feet every step that she took. all of a sudden what happens is that she gets in front of him and she's smiling. Actually, she's beaming from ear to ear so that she's smiling so big that you could put a banana in sideways. And he asked her, he said, well, what happened? She said, you know, just after a small amount of time, I began to say what I liked about my job. And it wasn't too long before, all of a sudden, I didn't think about liking my job. I actually love my job. I really love my job. And all of a sudden, what happened was, she wasn't going to be fired, like was what was about to happen before. She actually was promoted, that she never had an opportunity to get. All over one thing: perspective. What she thought, how she looked at something. She didn't see it as a can't-do issue. She saw everything that she did as a can-do, something that we can do, something that we can overcome, something that we can make, something that we can adjust, something that we can all enjoy. I'm here to make it better for everyone, not necessarily just for me. And so it happened also with the children of Israel, that there was a perspective, and let's make sure that we kind of try to get through some of this today, because we haven't been. So there are only two ways, friends, to look at anything in life: through the hopelessness of my problems, or through the lens of God's promises. The question is, what are you looking at? What are you looking at in relationship? What are you looking at in your career? What are you looking at in your relationship with God? What are you looking at in your church? What are you looking at in the people that you know? What are you looking at? The Apostle Paul said this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. He said that even the problems of life would begin to work for us while we don't look at the things which are seen. Now, it's not the fact that we're not looking. It's the fact that we've chosen what we're going to look at. You know, one of the things that I learned about life, it's pretty interesting, and I think that you might find it to be interesting too, because I think this will help us to actually make some right decisions and go in some right directions. And that is that those whom we love can do no wrong. And those that we're suspicious about can do no right. Now think about that for a moment. Isn't that true? Those whom we love can do no wrong. And those that we're suspicious about can do no right. Doesn't matter how right that they are, they can't do it. Doesn't matter how wrong that they are, they never did it. Now, I know many of you wives, how well you have been able to ignore the ignorance of the person you chose to spend the rest of your life with. I know that to be true. You have actually been able to do that successfully. Successfully. And so here we find that Paul says, now not looking at the things that you see, not at the things that you, everyone say, see. That's interesting, isn't it? He said, but what you do is you focus on what you don't see. I think you're a great person. I think you're wonderful. I think that you can make it. I think that you can do it. I believe that you're going to come out on top in everything that you do in life. A lot of times what we do is that we spend most of our time reinforcing what we don't want in the lives of other people. And because we spend so much time reinforcing what happens in their lives, when it happens, we say, see, I told you so. But Paul said, you don't look at the things which you see, but you look at the things you don't see. Now, when it comes down into the arena of faith, what you do is that if you're not seeing health, you look at health. If you're not seeing wealth, you look at wealth. If you're not seeing salvation, you can discuss it with a person about how great of a Christian that they're about to become. So you don't look at the things that are seen, but you look at the things that are not seen. Most of the people that I've ever met in my life, their perspective has always been that they think that they really made a discovery when something has been present the whole time. We didn't make that discovery. It's been there like forever. It's that all of a sudden, when you chose not to love something anymore, it became evident to you. Because those whom we love can do no wrong. But those that we question can do no right. And so in Hebrews chapter 12, verse number 2, the Bible tells us this. He said, fixing your eyes or placing your eyes upon Jesus. Put your eyes upon him. He said, because for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He despised the shame and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Let's picture this for a moment. Everyone say picture. You need to see pictures. In the picture, here's the issue, is that the picture of this is that what Jesus was involved in was an entire people who were an enemy of God. What Jesus was involved in was that every one of the people that he spent 3.5 years discipling with had now left him. What Jesus was seeing was that anything that his Father told him to come to do didn't look like it worked at all. But what happened was, he said, who for the joy that was set before him, not looking at the things which he saw, but the things which he didn't see, who for the joy that was set before him, he was able to endure the cross. Remember in the book of Matthew chapter 26, verses 39 through 42, if you remember that was when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he said, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. He said, nevertheless, not what I will, but what? Okay, see, he endured the cross. He despised. Everyone say despised. He despised the shame. Now, in despising the shame, dearest, what you need to understand about despising the shame, that meant that he was shamed. He was a man that went from the most popular man in the entire nation, and in less than 1 year's time, he became the most hated man. And they put him up in front of everyone naked. And didn't crucify him like he crucified others. But with him, different than the others, they pierced his hands and his feet. He endured the cross. He despised the shame. Why? Because he was looking to be set down at the right hand of the throne of God. It all depends on how you see it. It's all your perspective. Say, thank God. Thank God. My perspective is the way he sees things. Because it's your perspective. You see, this happened actually, friends, this happened with the spies. In the book of Numbers, chapter 13, through the end of the chapter, the spies had one of two perspectives. Remember, it was focusing on God's problems or focusing or man's problems, or focusing on what? God's promises. You focus on man's problems or you focus on God's promises. There's only one of two perspectives in life. I can focus on where I think I am, or I can focus on where God has called me to be. You mean nothing ever bothers you? Nothing ever really bothers you. I think at times people think that things don't bother people. But let me help you. You cannot afford to let it bother you. You can't afford to let it bother you. So the spies had one of two perspectives. In the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 25 through 33, I want to read this to you because it's important to us. He said, after exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the people of Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit that they had taken from the land. Grapes like watermelons. This was their report to Moses. He said, we arrived in the land you sent us to see. And it is indeed a magnificent country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here is some of its fruit as proof. But the people living there are powerful. Their cities and towns they're surrounded. They've got huge walls. These things are large, and we also saw the descendants of the giants. You know those guys whose fathers were angels and whose mothers were our sisters. That's who was there. They're powerful. Then the Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan Valley. But things were dipping really quick. Morale was going from 100 to 0 in one sentence. But Caleb tried to encourage the people.
If you are in the Tinley Park area, we would love for you to join us at any of our services. We have a 5 p.m. service on Saturdays, and on Sundays we have a 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. service. We also have a midweek service on Wednesdays at 7:15 p.m. With over 30 years of ministry, FHC has something for everyone. To find out more about FHC, like us on Facebook or go to our website, fhclife.org, or call our office at 708-614-6000. We look forward to seeing you soon.